But it's the plight of individual boys and girls which worries me most. Too often, our children don't get the education they need, the education they deserve. And in the inner cities, where youngsters must have a decent education if they are to have a better future, that opportunity is all too often snatched from them by hard left education authorities and extremist teachers. And children who need to be able to count and multiply are learning anti-racist mathematics, whatever that may be. Children who need to be able to express themselves in clear English are being taught political slogans. Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
The aim of this government is to make everyone as miserable as possible.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up already!
With our pride, they say to celebrate it is social suicide. I'm not your average beat boy, I'm not your rebel guy. You wanna make us hate it, you wanna make us so slide.
TV, the first ever lesbian and gay series on the BBC.
That's right. For the next 6 weeks, we'll be here queering your pitch with a brand new magazine show about lesbian and gay life.
So basically, we're a bit like an alternative Richard and Judy, really, aren't we, Ben?
Yeah, except we don't talk about our children the whole time.
That's right, we don't have any anyway. So why don't you just sit back and relax and get ready for a riotous romp through our lesbian and gay world. And remember, it's not daytime, it's gay time.
I'm pleased Peter's been honest and said he is gay, but he hasn't changed it in any way from probably I feel just the same towards him. You know, I sort of, I've always got on very well with him and feel no differently towards him, really. Don't know if you feel any differently towards me now you've told me.
Well, it gives us another topic of conversation.
So if, I mean, it's like if somebody says to me, are you gay, are you bent is the usual expression in the East End, I say, yes, I am.
Oh, there's hardly anyone here. There's nobody.
This event is billed as the climax of Gay Pride Week. But in effect, it's the climax of 10 years in which homosexuals have acquired a new pride and a new name. Today they're called gays, and they're coming out on the streets of London. They assembled off the embankment at 1 o'clock on a June day in the summer of '79. Nearly 1,500 policemen were on duty. A symbolic presence, for this march commemorated a famous brush with the law. 10 years previously in America, homosexuals who frequented the Stonewall Inn in New York's Greenwich Village grew exasperated at continuous police harassment and hit back. The riot that ensued was the flashpoint of the gay liberation movement.
I was about 8 or 9 when I first heard the word lesbian, when a friend of mine came home one lunchtime and said to me, I've learnt some more dirty words, and I can't remember what any of the others were, but this was one of them. But I do remember sort of playing games with other boys and girls of my own age, and we went behind buildings and showed each other private parts and things like that. And I can remember sort of being absolutely revolted by the boys and thinking, how amazing that anyone could be interested in this.
Hey, hey, it's not unusual.
In a time when same-sex schools were predominant, romantic friendships among girls were seen simply as a healthy and natural part of growing up. Far from discouraging such relationships, many teachers saw them as a way of encouraging the girls to be independent. Relationships among spinster teachers themselves were not uncommon, with a Dr. Williams complaining in the Daily Herald that they were bitter, sexless or homosexual hoydens who tried to mold the girls into their own pattern. Far too often they succeed.
I was very, very confused because I thought, you know, I am different from these other girls and not interested in boys. And then one day when the village policeman came past and took an interest in me and asked me out, and over the years taught me a great deal, I thought, well, perhaps I'd better go along with this and see what it's, you know, see what it's all about. And I felt a bit superior to the girls at school. After all, I got this man, he was 27, and he was nice looking, and he could borrow supercars from the local farmers for whom he did all sorts of favours, I expect. You know, he'd say, well, I've got a weekend off, I've borrowed the Jag. We'd go somewhere, and if Irene had said, Irene Bates, you see, my senior girlfriend, said, you know, would I like to go and watch some hockey in Lewes? I'd go and watch the hockey in Lewes and ditch George.
One of the customers at this little shop was, I think she was the secretary from a sports club outside Brighton. Very attractive woman, a sporty type. And it got to, after a few visits, she was going my way home. Would I like to have a lift home? Well, I was one that loved to ride in a car, yes. She took me out home, devious way, round to what we call the Yellow Hills. And at the Yellow Hills, she introduced me to a little lovemaking, a bit more than a kiss, in the back of this little car, fondling and so on, nothing too serious. And next time, I thought, oh, it's not too bad, this. Next time she asked me to go, yes, I go. And she goes a step further and she said, well, you know you're not like other girls, don't you? She said, I said, well, yeah. She said, well, you're a lesbian. She said, it's, you'll be all right. You'll get on fine. And she didn't do too much, but she just certainly introduced me to a lesbian lovemaking. I thought it was wonderful. I'd never had boys poking around and fondling. I just wasn't attracted to them at that age. And she made it very pleasant. I thought, oh, this is great. If this had been a lesbian, I'll be a lesbian. It's great.
When the House voted in favour of the government's bill which bans the promotion of homosexuality by local authorities. Some demonstrators were arrested and are being held overnight, but others who'd abseiled onto the floor of the House walked away free.
We waited till the vote went through, so that in no way were we going to change anybody's mind. We did the respectable bit and sat in there and listened to it, and then they legislated against us, so we thought, well, we'll just shake them up a bit. And maybe make them think,
Actually,
maybe...
if you went in there with a rope, you didn't think, we'll shake them up a bit. You went in there intending to do it all the time.
No, we weren't going to do it.
You just took a rope just for fun.
If the vote was on our side, we were going to walk out.
3 women gay rights protesters caused pandemonium in the House of Lords when they abseiled from the public gallery onto the floor of the chamber. Black Rod and his staff quickly seized the demonstrators and escorted them out. The women were protesting that the Lords had approved a clause banning local councils from promoting homosexuality.
The House of Lords had just voted to put the controversial Clause 28 on homosexuality into the bill when the trouble started.
The gallery was in an uproar, and then we noticed that coming down from the railings, the balcony, ropes were being thrown down, and 3 or 4 young people began to scale down.
And what was the mood of the peers when they saw all this?
Well, they were absolutely stunned. Incredible. We just couldn't believe that this sort of thing was going on inside the House of Lords.
A story that started in our studios tonight. The BBC has begun an inquiry into how 4 women demonstrators were able to get into the 6 o'clock television news studio and attempt to disrupt the start of tonight's programme. They were protesting against a new law, which comes into effect at midnight, stopping local councils from promoting homosexuality. Mike Smart reports.
It was clear to viewers from the start of the 6 o'clock news that something was wrong.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. In the House of Lords, a vote is taking place now on a challenge to the poll tax. Tory rebels have said that the tax...
Sue Lawley apologised and continued to broadcast. Out of vision, her co-presenter Nicholas Witchell and other BBC staff restrained the protesters. Outside the studio, one woman who'd handcuffed herself to camera cables was cut free.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Another and the piece of studio furniture she'd handcuffed herself to were parted in a corridor. Led away, the women repeated their protest.
Protesting about rights for lesbian and gay people.
The inquiry into how the women got into the studio is already underway.
Well, what happened this evening was intolerable. There'll be a proper inquiry and we'll make sure that this doesn't happen again on any of our news programmes. I do say that I think Sue Lawley and Nick Witchell behaved admirably in the circumstances, and I'm very glad that we continued with the broadcast and made sure that all our news went out.
With handcuffs still attached to the camera cable and the 6 o'clock news still on the air, the protesters were taken away by police.
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Sue Lawley and Nicholas Witchell.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. In the House of Lords, a vote is taking place now on a challenge to the poll tax. Tory rebels have said that the tax is unfair and unpopular. Lord Whitelaw's told them they should not be confronting the elected chamber. We'll be going over to the House of Lords for the results. There are to be changes in the way nurses work and are trained, changes to stop them leaving the profession. Another prosecution involving undercover police and alleged football hooligans has collapsed. No evidence was offered. Also tonight, Glasnost gives us a glimpse inside the Soviet army. And with 1 week to go before the 4th summit, we have reports from Washington and Moscow on the preparations Mr. Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev are making for their meeting. And repairing the roads. Why the cones signal a lot more chaos this summer. And I do apologise if you're hearing quite a lot of noise in this studio at the moment. I'm afraid that we have rather been invaded by some people who we hope to be removing.
We have with us a variety of protesters, some of whom have taken the law into their own hands for their own particular cause. We meet them in a moment, but the issue was thrown into sharp focus this week when 4 women invaded a television news broadcast. Sarah, you sound very muffled there. Why are you so muffled?
Well, Nicholas Witchell was sitting on me at the time, so it's quite hard to speak. Also, there's somebody else sitting on the bottom of my body, so I was actually quite frightened. I mean, I actually thought I was going to suffocate. So
a lot of people here and a lot of people I've spoken to sort of said, hoo, wasn't that a jolly good stunt? But wasn't it a ridiculously irresponsible thing to have done, to have gate-crashed a bulletin like that? Why did you do it?
No, I don't think it was at all. I mean, there's about 4 news programmes in a whole evening. I don't think it was irresponsible. I don't think anyone had missed anything. I mean, the most exciting thing they were reporting on that evening was the poll tax. And, you know, I don't think 5 minutes would have sort of worried many people.
And the reason we did it was because Section 28 of the Local Government Act became law that night at midnight. And it's a basic civil attack on the rights, the civil rights of lesbians and gays in this country.
And I suspect if you'd asked everyone here what you did, they'd all have remembered what you did. But I doubt very many would know why you did it.
Did you hear Section 28 mentioned?
Yes. There you go.
So was it a justified protest?
Yes. I think so. I hope so. I hope it... Well, it's got us on this programme and we're talking about Section 28, so everybody who's watching this programme knows that Section 28 is an attack on civil rights.